Every town has one. One house that everyone avoids. One neighbor that no one talks about. One place where the mail piles up, where the lawn stays dead, where the windows seem too dark even in daylight. For us, that was number 47. It sat at the very end of our cul-de-sac, an old, peeling two-story house that should have been condemned years ago. The shingles were rotting. The fence leaned like a drunk. The front yard was nothing but patches of dirt and weeds littered with broken lawn ornaments that had long since lost their color. And the man who lived there? Mr. Crowley. I don't think anyone knew his first name. Just Crowley. And everyone hated him. Not in the way you hate a bad neighbor for playing music too loud or leaving their trash bins out too long. No. This was different. The entire street suffered because of him. And no matter how bad it got, no one could do a thing about it. It started small. At first, Crowley was just the weird guy on the block. The one who never left his house, the one who never turned on his lights, the one who only ever came outside to glare at people. If your dog so much as sniffed his yard, he'd stand on his porch and watch you until you left. If you parked too close to his house, you'd wake up to find long scratches down the side of your car. At night, he'd walk up and down the street, barefoot in an old robe, just staring at people's houses. I caught him doing it once. It was late, maybe 2 a.m. I was up watching TV when I heard shuffling outside. I peeked through my blinds. There he was, standing in the middle of the street, staring at my house. He wasn't moving, just standing there, shoulders hunched like he was listening. I held my breath, waiting for him to leave. After what felt like forever, he turned, walked back to his house, and disappeared inside. I didn't sleep that night. Over time, things got worse. First, the cats started disappearing. At least 6 of them gone without a trace. Posters went up. Kids cried. People blamed coyotes. But we all knew. Because Mr. Crowley had started leaving meat out in his yard. Raw. Bloody. Rotting. I saw it myself, piles of it. Sometimes in bowls. Sometimes just dumped right onto the grass. No one knew why. And no one wanted to ask. Then the smell started. It was strongest near his house, a thick, rancid stench that coated the air like oil. Something between rotting garbage and sewage. People complained. The HOA sent warnings. But Crowley didn't respond. And then one morning we woke up to find every single front door on the street had been smeared with something. Something dark. Something that reeked. The police were called. They scraped samples off the doors, tested it, but we never heard back. That was the day people started putting their houses up for sale. But no one ever moved. Because once you lived on the street, you didn't leave. Or maybe you couldn't. I tried to ignore it all. Tried to tell myself he was just an old, bitter man who liked scaring people. That he was harmless. Until the night I heard scratching at my window. I woke up instantly. Sat up in bed, heart hammering. The room was dark, but the moon cast a sliver of light onto my bedroom window. And there, I saw a hand. Just fingertips pressed against the glass. Long, dirty. The nails too sharp. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then the fingers curled. And started tapping. Slow. Deliberate. I wanted to scream. Wanted to run. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I crept to the window. Peered through the blinds. Nothing. But when I looked down now, I saw footprints in the dirt below my window. And I saw something else too. A dead cat. Its body was missing its head. And beside it, half buried in the dirt, was a single, rusted key. I didn't touch it. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told my neighbor, Mike. Mike was the kind of guy who didn't take crap from anyone. Built like a linebacker, always the first to call the HOA when things went wrong. He listened, then scowled. Enough is enough. That afternoon, he marched straight up to Crowley's door. Banged on it. Waited. No answer. Mike knocked again, harder. I know you're in there, you piece of... The door creaked open. Not much. Just an inch. But enough to see that the hallway inside was pitch black. No lights. No movement. Just the overwhelming smell of something rotting. Mike gagged. Jesus. He backed away, waving his hand in front of his nose. The hell is that? A noise came from inside the house. Something slow. Wet. Like breathing. Mike stepped back. Yeah, screw this. He turned. Walked away. And just as he did, the door swung all the way open. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see inside. Long enough to see that the walls were covered in writing. Scrawled in black ink. Smeared red in places. Over and over, covering every inch of space, were the same words. You're all mine. That night, Mike's house burned down. The fire started in the garage, spread fast. No one knew how. The fire department found him inside, or what was left of him, because there was something wrong with his body. Something the police wouldn't talk about. But I saw them carry him out. Saw the way his arms were twisted at impossible angles. Saw how his mouth had been sewn shut. And when they wheeled his body past me, I saw something else. Something stitched into his skin, right across his chest. 3 words. You're all mine. After Mike died, everything changed. The for sale signs that had been up for months, they disappeared overnight. Not sold. Not taken down by the owners. Just gone. People stopped talking about moving. Stopped talking at all. It was like the entire street shrank in on itself. Like we all knew without saying it that we were stuck. Because no one left. Not even the people who wanted to. I tested it myself. One night, around 2 a.m., I got in my car and drove toward the highway. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't pack a bag. I just left. I drove for half an hour. Past the gas station, the old strip mall, the diner on the corner. The further I went, the lighter I felt. Like I had broken whatever spell this place had. And then I saw it. The turn for my street. I slammed the brakes. It didn't make sense. I had been going straight. There was no way I had looped back. No way. I checked my phone. The GPS was glitching. My location pin blinked over and over. Stuck in place. I took another road. Drove for another 30 minutes. But no matter which way I went, no matter how far I drove, I always ended up right back on my street. I wasn't the only one who tried. A few days later, I heard about the Hendersons. Nice couple. Lived in the yellow house near the entrance of the cul-de-sac. They had been planning to move for months. Ever since Crowley started leaving raw meat on their driveway. One afternoon, I saw them loading up a moving truck. The husband, Mr. Henderson, was sweating, face red, shoving boxes into the back. His wife was standing by the door, visibly shaking. I walked over. You guys finally leaving? They both froze. For a second, it looked like they wanted to answer. But then, at the exact same time, they turned their heads toward number 47. Crowley's house. The door was open just a crack. Just enough for someone inside to be watching. Mr. Henderson wiped his forehead, swallowed hard and said, "No, we're not." That night, the moving truck was still there. Still full. Still packed. And the next morning, the truck was gone. But the Hendersons were still here. Living in the same house. Like they had never planned to leave. After that, we stopped trying. We stopped calling the cops. Stopped complaining to the HOA. It was like everyone on the street had come to the same silent agreement. We would stay. We would keep to ourselves. And we would never go near Crowley's house. Because Mike had tried. And Mike had burned. Then the noises started. Every night, around 3 a.m., the same sound. A slow, steady knocking. It wasn't coming from anyone's door. It was coming from inside Crowley's house. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But then others heard it too. One night, I was outside smoking when I saw my neighbor, Jen, standing in her driveway. She was staring at number 47. She looked sick, pale, hollow-eyed. I walked over. "Jen?" She didn't answer. She just whispered, "Do you hear it?" And I did. Knock, knock, knock. Steady, unchanging. "Every night," Jen murmured. "Same time, same rhythm." She turned to me, her eyes dark and sunken. "I think someone's inside." That night I watched. Sat by my window, eyes locked on Crowley's house. And at 3 a.m. exactly, the knocking started. But then something changed. This time, after a few minutes, the knocking stopped. And a voice spoke. From inside the house. A voice that was not Crowley's. It was faint, weak, like someone had been screaming for days and had no voice left. And I swear to God, I heard it whisper, "Help me." I didn't sleep. The next morning, I did something stupid. I went to number 47. For the first time in my life, I stepped onto Crowley's property. The grass was brittle under my shoes, the ground too soft. Like something rotting was buried beneath it. I approached the door. It was slightly open, not enough to see inside. Just enough for me to know that if I pushed it, it would swing open. I raised my hand to knock, and that's when I saw it. Nailed to the front of the door, a missing persons flyer, old, yellowed with age, and on it was Mike's face, with a date, 2 weeks before he died. I stepped back, my stomach twisted, and then, the door slammed shut, on its own. I ran. Didn't stop until I was back inside my house. Door locked, curtains drawn. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that maybe someone had just tacked up that flyer as a sick joke. Until the next day, when I saw another flyer, this time on Jen's door, with her face on it, and a new date, 1 week from today. Jen didn't leave her house after that. She stopped answering the door, stopped going to work, stopped opening her curtains. But at night, her lights stayed on. I knew because I checked. I wasn't the only one. The whole street was watching her. Because we all knew. Once your name appeared on a flyer, you were next. I tried to talk to her. I knocked on her door the next morning, waited too long for an answer. When it finally opened, she barely looked like herself. Her hair was a mess. Her eyes were dark, hollowed out. Like she hadn't slept. She didn't say anything. Didn't even look at me. Just handed me something. A paper. No. A flyer. But it wasn't hers. It was mine. My face. My name. With a date. 1 week from today. I don't remember what I said. Or if I even spoke. I just turned and left. Walked back to my house in a daze, heart hammering, hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped the flyer. When I stepped inside, I locked the door. And then, against every screaming instinct, I checked the date on Mike's flyer. He died the exact day it said he would. And Jen's date? Tomorrow. I wasn't going to wait. I wasn't going to be another name on a missing persons list. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't care if the road looped me back. I was going to keep driving until I found a way out. But just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed. A text. From Jen. I stared at the screen. I hadn't heard from her since this morning. I almost didn't read it. I almost left. But something about it made my stomach twist. It was just one sentence. Don't try to leave. Come over now. I hesitated. Everything in me said run. But if Jen was reaching out now after ignoring everyone for days, something was wrong. So instead of getting in my car, I went to her house. The first thing I noticed was that her porch light was out, and her door was unlocked. I stepped inside. Jen? Silence. Then, a noise from the kitchen. Something soft. Dripping. I moved carefully through the dark, past the living room, past the stairs. My foot hit something. I looked down. My stomach dropped. Another flyer. This one was different. There was no photo. Just a name. Mr. Crowley. And a date. 20 years ago. My breath caught. And then, from the kitchen, a wet, ragged breath. I turned the corner. And there, standing in the middle of the room, was Jen. But she wasn't alone. A man stood behind her. No, not a man. A shadow. A shape too tall, too thin, with hands too long. His fingers were wrapped around her shoulders. His mouth was right next to her ear. And Jen, her eyes were wide, but she wasn't moving. Her lips moved barely. Help me. I grabbed her arm. Yanked her away. But the shadow didn't move. Didn't stop me. Just stood there. Watching. Smiling. And then I saw it. In the dim light, across the kitchen table, a stack of missing persons flyers. Some new. Some old. And at the very bottom, a new one. Freshly printed. With a name I didn't recognize. Because it hadn't happened yet. Because it was for tomorrow. And it wasn't Jen's anymore. It was mine. Jen wasn't speaking. She was breathing too fast, her eyes locked on something behind me, on the shadow that had been gripping her just seconds ago. But when I turned back, it was gone. No slow retreat. No vanishing act. Just empty space where it had been standing. Like it had never been there at all. But I knew better. Because the air was still wrong. The whole house felt wrong. Like we weren't alone. Like we had never been alone. I grabbed Jen's wrist, pulled her toward the door. We need to leave. She didn't resist. Didn't say a word. Just followed. And as we stepped onto her porch, I saw it. Another flyer. Taped to my own front door. We ran. Straight to my house, straight inside. I slammed the door, locked it, shut every curtain. Jen collapsed onto my couch, staring at nothing. I stood there, heart racing, trying to breathe. Then finally I moved to the door. Ripped the flyer down. And read it. But it wasn't my face anymore. It wasn't anyone's face. Just a name. Mr. Crowley. And a date. 20 years ago. I didn't understand at first. I looked at Jen. What does this mean? She didn't answer. But she didn't have to. Because now I remembered. Mr. Crowley wasn't just a bad neighbor. He wasn't just some crazy old man. He was the first name, the first person this street had chosen, the first one to disappear. And when he did, something took his place. Not a ghost, not a demon, something worse, something that never lets go. I remembered the stories now. Crowley had been a normal man once, decades ago, just a guy living in the last house on the street. Then one day he went missing. The police searched his house, but they never found him. Instead, they found a single, rusted key, sitting in the middle of his kitchen table. And after that, people started vanishing. One by one, always the same pattern. A name would appear, a date would follow, and the house at the end of the street? It always had someone living in it. No matter how many times the owner disappeared, because it needed someone. It needed a Crowley. And now? It had picked me. I dropped the flyer. No, my voice shook. This is insane. Jen just stared. Then finally she spoke. It wants you to take his place. I shook my head. No, that doesn't make sense. It's not going to let you leave. I didn't want to believe her. But deep down I knew she was right. Because I had already tried to leave. I had already failed. And now? I was out of time. 3 a.m. The knocking started. Slow. Heavy. I was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, Jen beside me. We both heard it. Knock. 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 I squeezed my eyes shut. I knew what would happen next. Because I had heard it before. The whisper. The voice from inside the house. But this time, it wasn't coming from Crowley's house. It was coming from inside mine. Help me. Jen's nails dug into my arm. She had gone pale, eyes wide with terror. I swallowed hard. Stood up. I have to go. No, Jen grabbed me. That's what it wants. I pulled away. Because now I understood. This wasn't about Crowley. This wasn't about me. This was about the street. About keeping it fed. One person at a time. And now if I didn't go, it would take someone else. Jen. The Hendersons. Everyone. Because the house at the end of the street needed an owner. And if I refused, it would choose again. I stepped outside. The air was thick, suffocating. The street was empty. Silent. But I knew they were watching. From behind their curtains. From behind their fear. Because they had all been here before. Watching someone take their turn. Watching someone become the next Crowley. I reached the front door. Placed my hand on the doorknob. It was ice cold. I turned it. And as the door swung open, everything changed. The sky shifted. The air grew heavier. And the street? The street was gone. Just blackness stretched beyond the front porch. Like the whole world had been peeled away. Like the house at the end of the street existed on its own now. And inside? Inside, the walls were still covered in writing. Scrawled over and over again in different handwriting. Some old. Some new. Some I recognized. Mike. The Hendersons. Jen. And now at the very bottom, freshly written it. My name. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me. And in the darkness I saw it. The table. With a single, rusted key. Waiting for me. And I knew what I had to do. Because this street? It never lets anyone leave. Unless someone else takes their place. And the next time someone moves in, they'll see me. At the window. At 3 a.m. Waiting. Just like he did. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The street was always quiet, but now? Now it felt like a graveyard. Like everything stopped existing the second I stepped into this house. The walls still had writing all over them. Names. Dates. Messages scrawled by the ones who came before me. But something was different now. Something I could feel. I wasn't just reading the names. I was part of them. The second the door had slammed shut, I had become something else. And deep down I knew. I was never leaving this house again. The next morning I saw the first sign. A moving truck. Pulled up right across the street. A new family. I watched from the upstairs window, the glass colder than ice beneath my fingertips. A man. A woman. A kid, maybe 10 years old. They looked so happy. Smiling. Laughing. Like they had no idea. Like they didn't know what this street does. But they would. Because now it was my turn. To watch. To wait. To make sure they never left. I didn't sleep. I stood by the window all night, eyes locked on their house. At 3 a.m. I felt it. The pull. The thing that the others before me must have felt. Like something deep inside the house was saying. Go now. It's time. I didn't fight it. Because I couldn't. This place had me now. It wasn't a choice. It was just what happens. I stepped outside, the air so thick it barely moved. Walked to their house. And knocked 3 times. The light turned on in the hallway. A shadow moved behind the glass. A second later, the door cracked open. The man, the father, peeked out, squinting against the darkness. I saw the confusion in his eyes. The same confusion we all had in the beginning. He frowned. Can I help you? I opened my mouth to speak. But instead, the words just came out. Flat. Empty. Like someone else was saying them for me. You shouldn't be here. The man stiffened. His hand gripped the door, knuckles going white. Behind him, his wife's voice called out, "Who is it?" He hesitated. Then turned back, forcing a chuckle. "Just a neighbor. It's fine." But we both knew he didn't believe that. He looked at me one last time. I could see it happening. That tiny moment where the fear starts to take root. That 1 second where the thought crosses his mind, that maybe they should leave. But they never do. Because no one ever gets out. Instead, he forced another fake smile. Okay, well, have a good night." Then he shut the door. And I turned. Walked back to my house. To my prison. To wait. Until it was his turn. A few nights later, the second sign appeared. A missing persons flyer. Not mine this time. Not Jen's. Not Mike's. His. Taped right to his front door. With a date. 1 week from today. And deep down I knew. He would never make it past that date. Because the street needs someone. It always does. And I'm not the new Crowley anymore. He is. I watched the cycle start again. The way the man started sleeping less. The way he checked the locks 5 times before bed. The way he started seeing shapes moving in the dark. He never said anything. Never told his wife. But I could see it. The realization sinking in. The slow horror of knowing something is wrong here, but it's already too late. Because once you move in, you never leave. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard it. The fire. Saw the glow from his garage. Saw the flames reaching toward the sky. It was just like Mike's house. The pattern never changes. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. They found him inside. Or what was left of him. And I knew it. When they wheeled his body out, somewhere on his skin, stitched deep into his flesh, were the words. "You're all mine." The next morning, I looked outside. His house was still standing. Even though I had watched it burn. Even though I had seen it collapse. It was back. Untouched. Like nothing had ever happened. And in the driveway? A new moving truck. Another family. Another victim. And the cycle? It would start all over again. Because this street never lets anyone go. It just replaces them. And now I would be the one watching. Waiting. Until the next flyer appeared. Until the next person vanished. Because I understood now. This street isn't haunted. It isn't cursed. It's just hungry. And it always finds someone new to feed it. Always.